Good to share some slides. Okay, so good afternoon. I am Anto Buriarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday at 3 o'clock to figure out where smart buildings is headed. The profiles of the panelists are on Monday Live if you want to see who's involved in this. Just as a reminder that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Please do post questions and comments on the chat and the Q&A, and complete the survey at the end if you would, please. This slide deck is on mondaylive.org. We're going to have some links on it. If you want any of those links, just head over there and you'll see it on the homepage. Just a reminder, our topic of March, of which this is the first today, is sustainability. So we have 5 weeks to talk about sustainability, so that should be good. This is the agenda of today. We'll have a chit chat about what's going on, and then we'll talk about sustainability from the respect of the reliable grid. The question is that, can we really have a reliable grid that will enable a sustainable future? And we have a guest, Doug Houseman, that I'll bring on stage soon. Some links, some slides on the slides here. Ken Sinclair talking about the March issue, which I'm sure he's going to explain a lot more, is centered around International Women's Day next week. And yeah, I'll just let him talk in a minute. John Petsy is going to talk about the sustainability being potentially dead. So I'll leave it there for a minute. Mark Peacock is talking about investments in 2021 and sustainable energy. Roger is talking about the investment in CRE. We'll go back to that in a second. We do have a new energy secretary, Jennifer Granholm, and it'll be interesting to see how she gets on. She made this tweet that I saw over the weekend about the linkage with resilient clean energy future being electric grid. So it'll be interesting to see Doug's take on that. And with that, I'm going to stop the share. And yeah, Ken, why don't you start? Tell us about what's going on.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This is good timing because our issue is just online. We got it up yesterday and had some pretty good response, about sort of 1,000 views of the LinkedIn post already. The women really knocked it out of the park here. It is International Women's Day. We did this last year. It was our first time we did a tribute to the women of the industry, and we did a repeat. And we got a lot of different folks involved, and it went a little different direction. But it is totally amazing the way they just all showed their individuality, and they are the change. We're looking for change in our industry. The change is within us. We just need to build and, I think, unleash them. A lot of good comments about mentoring, how important that is to get people into the industry, because it's sort of so awesome trying to get in. There's so many details, and unless you have somebody that you can kind of follow and guide you through the blur, it's difficult. And that's a common theme in almost everybody's story of how they got where they are and where they're going. So that was great. The two takeaways was that the mentoring is just mandatory. That's got to be a part of bringing people into the industry. And I thought they did a great job of explaining how they came into the industry and what they do in the industry, and how they find it quite exciting, because it's the chaos that we all see in our industry seems to intrigue them all, in the fact that it's never boring, because you come in and all of a sudden you're doing something that you hadn't even imagined you were going to have to do that day. So it is ever changing. I think it sends a real good message out to get a lot more women involved in our industry. I think also they have some of the skills that we need. We're all healing from this COVID thing, and we need to have the buildings represent themselves with more touch and feel than they have in the past. We're making that transition from home possibly back to the buildings. So the buildings have to have a lot more empathy. I think women can help lead us as to how that might be done. Just a lot of things. The sustainability is part of almost everyone's message as well. That's the reason they're in the industry. Please give it a read. There's just some great resources there. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken. So, John, sustainability is dead.
Yeah, I thought that was a good one. You know what I've always liked, the word cloud concepts where they show, like the size of the word, how much it's appearing in books or the news or whatever. There's a finance site that I follow, and they track the terms that are appearing in annual reports, right? And that one's gone, this one's hot, whatever. So the reason I put those out there, well, two reasons. One, this month we're going to talk about sustainability, but I'm seeing a continual theme around what's behind those headlines that I showed, which is an indictment or expose of greenwashing, that corporations are finding an easy route to greenwash, that they're being green, they're being sustainable, and people are starting, people, organizations, reporters, sustainability organizations are starting to call BS on them, right? And that's what they meant. The first one with the strongest headline actually had a pretty dour view of it, that it has become so ingrained that it's causing society to believe that far more is being done than is, right? For example, if I'm Corporation A and the way I achieve sustainable metrics is by buying offsets, but I don't do a single thing to actually reduce the carbon that I generate in my processes, that's not helping the world at all. Right? Or very little by maybe incentivizing somebody to create offsets. So that's the theme. And literally I've seen this pop up numerous times over the past month. And so I've been holding those off to submit them for this month with our focus on sustainability.
Great, thank you. I'm sure we'll come back to this this hour. Mark?
So again, with our focus on sustainability, I kind of went that way too. So what I have up there today is Black & Veatch, one of the big engineering firms, does an annual strategic direction survey about megatrends. And three of the key ones that they're talking about for 2021 is the C-suite's influence on sustainability, which I thought was kind of an interesting mega trend. Another one was the next level reliability through resilience with respect to sustainability. And the third, which this group and our industry talks over and over and over again, which was nice to hear, turning data into action. So that was I thought, kind of telling there. And then the other link there is, which I find interesting, is the, and I encourage everybody to download it, is the Sustainability Energy in America Fact Book. It's, Bloomberg is involved with it, and it's got some really good, useful information about energy efficiency, natural gas, and renewable energy. So download it.
Great, thank you, Mark. Roger.
Yeah, this was something from Cushman and Wakefield, which I think these guys have gained some reasonable kudos through the whole COVID process. They were the first ones to jump on sort of identifying things that needed to happen. I also thought it brought a bit of color to the proceedings with the slides. But it's also good news. They're kind of, from their point of view anyway, if we believe them, they're actually forecasting that Q4 is going to look pretty good globally. There's a full report, which is quite a considerable size, but it's kind of saying, the world's getting injected, the economic outlooks have been revised upwards, the capital markets are recovering faster, and sheds, beds and meds, the niche assets remain attractive. So they're kind of suggesting that things are looking positive. They're saying Q1's still looking pretty dire. Globally, plus, the economy, occupier and capital markets, but the kind of market sectors, office, retail, residential, they're kind of showing should have actually recovered by the back end of the year. Not so much retail for standard stuff, environmental, but certainly the convenience stores. But there's a lot of areas there where they're giving positive vibes out, which can only be good news, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks, Roger. Any others have any things they want to raise? General news and trends?
Sorry, just jumping in. I did see one other report from Vedantics that actually said, don't lose focus because there's a lot of smaller buildings. Our image of large cities tends to be dominated by the skyscrapers, but actually 94% of commercial buildings in the US are made up of under 50,000 square feet. And they're the ones that are likely to be more agile, interchanging and stuff. That came from a report by Memori, which I just thought was, we always kind of consider the larger buildings all the time, but actually, huge percentage are the smaller buildings and shouldn't really lose focus on that.
Yeah. Anto, I think we should take what Roger just said and do, I don't know, does that warrant a whole month? Maybe a whole month on casting a wider net in our industry and going beyond just the skyscraper. So I think that's a great topic, Roger.
Yeah, different types of buildings. Yeah, good point. We'll discuss that. All right, so let us move on to the main topic. I'm going to bring on Doug Houseman. Doug, you should join us in a second. So I've known Doug for quite a number of years now. He used to be a regular speaker at my conferences I used to do 10, 20 years ago, especially around smart grid sort of related areas. So I always sort of thought that what Doug doesn't know about smart grid is not worth knowing. So with that as an introduction, Doug, welcome to the Monday Live group. You are muted. Hello, Doug.
I found it. You should be able to
Yay.
hear me now.
Yeah.
Too many
Good to
pieces
have
of
you.
conferencing software with different places to have mute buttons.
There should be a standard on mute button location.
There should.
Yeah. So tell us, Doug, are we ever going to get a grid that is resilient and reliable enough for sustainable energy?
It depends on where you live, whether you've already got it today or not. If you live in downtown Pittsburgh, the last time you had more than 1 second of outage was in the 1960s. If you live in one of the 450 cities that have spot networks built into the downtown area, you're probably seeing less than a minute per year of outage. If that's not good enough, Anto, I don't know how to get good enough. And most of that minute of outage is switching transients so they can do maintenance on second or third feeders that get to your building. And if you don't do that maintenance, you're not going to maintain that level of reliability and resiliency. Now, if you live out in a very rural area, you don't see anything close to that level of reliability. That's not the fault of the grid. It's the fault of decisions that were made in the 1920s to do open radial networks where you have one circuit that goes out from the substation and never touches another circuit. So you have no ability to do anything reasonable from a resilience point of view on the wire side. Now, of course, you can put batteries in. NREL estimates that for an average household, you need about $30,000 worth of batteries if you want 100% level of reliability. And obviously, as the building scales, the amount of batteries and the cost go up. As we work through things right now, the biggest problem with getting to more reliability is getting laws and regulations in states to change to allow building links to be able to backfeed circuits and put more in the way of switching capability in to isolate down to the actual level of problem in the grid in order to gain additional reliability and resiliency. And given that we're probably looking at one choice for energy by 2050, electricity, no backup fossil fuel generators, no natural gas pipelines, nothing else, kind of got to think that that's an important thing to do to get to a level of resiliency that will mean that everybody gets to have their electricity when they need it. Now, that doesn't mean you'll get to use as much electricity as you want to at any time, because we're more and more going to have to shape the load to match the generation. But it should mean that you aren't going to see massively long outages unless, of course, you're subject to a major earthquake or other natural disaster.
So what's the key here? Is it regulatory stuff, or is it the demand management side of things, or is it or is it batteries, or is it all of the above?
Well, it's some of all of the above, but the budgets spent by most of the utilities are heavily decided by the state regulators. So in California, when PG&E asked for a bucket full of money to fix problems with causing fires, the Public Utility Commission came back to CPUC and said, here, have half a bucket, fix it. As we look at trying to fix problems, we've got to be given adequate resources to be able to do that. And then it comes down to what new technologies can I apply that potentially add to my resiliency. In Texas a couple of weeks ago, there were many people who had solar on their roof and 4-hour batteries at their house. And at the end of 6 hours, they were without electricity. The battery was flat and there was snow on their photovoltaics. And that snow that fell on the 12th stayed on most of those photovoltaics through the 18th when the crisis ended. So just because you have your own solar and battery does not mean that you can ride out a 100-hour crisis.
So this group and the audience here mostly concern ourselves with smart buildings and smart systems. That obviously a major part of that is managing energy. So obviously one of the angles that we're trying to sort of figure out is the role of buildings, the role of the energy consumption in commercial buildings, and how that can be managed from a demand perspective, so that it can help regulate the grid.
Well, it's a good thing because buildings of all sorts account for 1/3 of our electricity use in North America. And how much demand response or demand side management we can get out of those buildings will determine how flexible the grid is and how much we can avoid in the way of rolling blackouts as we saw in Texas. So if I can store thermal energy in a smart building, and by the way, I heat my new workshop with passive solar 24/7. Then we can start to look at a serious reduction in the amount of energy that those buildings are going to consume at times when electricity is scarce. You look at Nova Scotia, almost every building in Nova Scotia stores between 24 and 96 hours of energy. And that means that when they need demand response, they've got a relatively simple demand response. They just turn off the electric heat, and that stored thermal energy can then be used to keep the building at the appropriate temperature during their 11-month and 29-day winter.
Hey, Doug, this
So
is,
that's,
go ahead.
oh, you go ahead.
I want to take you back up if you don't mind, and I'm sure we'll get back down to the building automation. I'm just curious, and by the way, thanks for joining today. I'm curious, based on a new administration and what you heard them talk about during the debates and so forth, when they talked a lot about energy consumption and all that, if you had a magic wand, or what would you think we'd be expecting to see from this new administration over the next 18 to 24 months? Or what do you hope we get to see?
Well, what you're going to probably see is focus on the transportation industry. Given Governor Granholm from Michigan has become the Secretary of Energy, and 6 other of the appointed people in the Department of Energy or other agencies have a strong transportation background. You know, Governor Granholm, bless her, made some incredibly poor decisions while she was governor about what to support in the way of batteries and solar and other things like that. And the state is still paying for about $1 billion in grants that she made to businesses that mostly went bankrupt. So her background is automotive. She's worked with the automotive leaders. She understands that part of things. I think that she was selected because she can make a deal that can be cemented without having to go through the House and the Senate, that will cause all of the transportation by 2035, with the exception of maybe heavy trucks, to be zero emission. And I really think that's going to be a major focus of this administration. You look at Mayor Pete in the Department of Transportation, what does that say? Trains and buses, trains and buses, trains and buses. So it's all about transportation. You read carefully through the 15-page executive order. There's no discussion of energy efficiency. There's no discussion of any buildings other than government buildings. There's no discussion of any renewables except offshore wind. You know, to me, that 15-page, which by the way is the longest executive order that President Biden has issued in page number, basically didn't talk about much beyond transportation and things the government was going to do. So don't be surprised if the next 4 years is focused on that third of energy use. We may get some things on buildings and so on, but you're not going to see a new energy efficiency building code. You're not going to see a requirement in law for any building before it's sold to meet certain energy efficiency requirements. From, you know, reading carefully through everything that's been written, the website that the Biden administration put up, and so on and so forth.
Thank
Doug,
you.
I've got a couple questions for you quickly. This is Steve Fay. On the thermal storage up in Nova Scotia, when you talk about that, if you want to explain what type of thermal storage and how that ultimately converts back to electricity, and then
It doesn't.
It doesn't. It's just hot water circulating into the building?
No, it's big, massive boxes of sand that are heated with resistance heat.
Okay.
And then as you need energy, you open the louver and allow some of that thermal energy out.
So it's just hot air.
It's just hot sand that makes hot air.
Yeah, got it. All right. So then my second question, which obviously having sand in downtown. I'm not sure to having, are you thinking, could I put that kind of sand in downtown New York City?
In the
Or a
quantity needed for something like the Empire State Building, no.
No, I didn't think so. Okay. So then the
In the
second,
quantity for any 2 or 3 story building, which there are lots of in New
Yep.
York City, absolutely.
okay. Okay, fair enough. And then obviously with this push to electric, there's a lot of, there's a parallel development around batteries. And we've had this conversation, just like your opinion, about the idea of putting massive batteries inside commercial buildings from a risk perspective. What's your feeling about that?
So long as you stay away from lithium ion and use something like a flow battery, I'm good.
Okay,
You use a lithium ion battery, you may end up like a large number of installations around the world that have exploded and burned.
right.
Doug, this is Jim Lee. I've been in and around this industry for 30 years, and we've seen many cycles of interest in smart grid and utility. We've ridden many of those cycles, tried to get involved. But as a business operating in this space, we've always had a major disconnect with the utility world. Whenever demand side resources are needed, regulatory regimes are typically put in place that allow some business model. As soon as the situation changes, those regulatory fiats disappear and the business models disappear with them. What's different now?
Nothing's different. Nothing will ever be different. Every new administration in any state is going to have the things that they want to support and the things they don't. You want to be in the demand management business right now, you got New York, California, and Hawaii. The administrations there have for a long period of time supported demand side management. The balance of the United States, not so much.
This is something that we've seen for years, which is the idea in the utility industry that their scale is so large that it actually matters. So you have a group like PJM in the Mid-Atlantic, tremendous reach, tremendous control. And for companies and industries like ours that make products and services, it's totally irrelevant. There's no way I could have and scale a product that just operated in the Mid-Atlantic. So this balkanization of regulatory issues really is a huge stumbling block for us to roll out technologies that have enough scale to have an economic payback. Do you see any movement in that balkanization of state by state regulation going anywhere, or are we still in that same pit forever?
You'll probably be in that same pit forever until we completely do away with state rights. And when we completely do away with state governments and go to just a federal government, and we have one administration to rule them all, then you got a pretty good idea that balkanization will go away. But I'll disagree with balkanization means you can't sustain and scale a company. DCSI, who became Aclara, originally just worked in Florida with one utility, Florida Power and Light. They've now deployed 1.4 million of Aclara's demand response devices in the residences, and they control 13,000 megawatts. I'm sorry, you can do it. You just have to be very focused with a product that will give you a large enough demand response that it makes sense to do it. If you're going to give somebody 50 watts here and 50 watts there, here 50 watts, there 50 watts, everywhere 50 watts, you're not going to make it.
Right.
Hey, Doug, I got to say, you're bringing a nice balance of cynicism and possibility to this group. Well done, man.
Well, after 40 years in the industry, I've seen a few cycles too.
So Stephen Cap just asked a question on the Q&A.
about transactive energy kind of initiatives and innovations and related, and specifically mentions FERC Order 2222. Any of that going to be at any sort of size or momentum to the matters at all, or it's just
FERC 2222, 42s, is probably going to be best used by the state regulators to do away with net metering over time. Until net metering goes away in a state, aggregating to sell into the wholesale market is going to be a massive losing effort. Because if I get net metering in the state, I'm getting between 11 and 22 cents per kilowatt hour. If I bundle that same energy up and sell it into the wholesale market, I'm going to get between 2 and 4 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, if I have any brains at all, I'm not going to throw away my 15 cents a kilowatt hour to get 3 and then have an aggregator take some of that. So maybe I get 2. That's a massively losing proposition for somebody who owns solar or batteries or anything else. Now, FERC orders 841, 842, and 845 already gave access to distributed energy resources and batteries to the wholesale market. So all 222 really did was say, you can insert an aggregator between yourself and the wholesale market. PJM was already down to 250 kilowatts. MISO is going down to 100 kilowatts. Why would I want to give an aggregator a third to half of the money that comes from my renewables to bid my resources into the market? There's been a lot of hype, but nobody's bothered to step back and say, okay, who gains from this? The only people who can potentially gain from this are an aggregator. Everybody else loses. Now, utility will be happy to stop paying you 15 cents and let you get, 3 in the wholesale market. And that'll help social justice on the distribution grid. And so they'll be happy to see that happen. But homeowners that got that kind of thing won't.
And on the technology side, transactive energy, and there's a whole plethora of obviously demand response related stuff that's kind of in that DER space.
Well, the problem with transactive energy at this point is the politicians have conflated it with blockchain. And when you start to look at the amount of energy it takes to process a transaction with traditional blockchain, you start talking about a 15-minute transaction for a house on a nice spring day. That might be 1/10 of a kilowatt hour. The energy required to process that 1/10 of a kilowatt hour for that interval is about a kilowatt hour. So does that make sense from a reducing energy consumption point of view? And in many cases, the answer is no. Now you take blockchain away from transactive energy, and you start to sort out how you can build the markets. And this has got to be done by distribution circuit, by phase, in order to maintain the market. Because if you live on the A phase of your circuit, and your neighbor lives on the C phase of your circuit, guess what? The energy you solar puts on that circuit can't get to your neighbor. Physically can't get there. So each circuit's got to be split into 3 markets that are the phases, and probably a 4th for 3-phase. And then the phase markets need to be married up at the substation for all the circuits coming out of the substation, and so on and so forth. So you get to a typical urban substation with 8 to 12 circuits on it. you might have 36 to 40 markets that you need to manage.
Jeez.
And you got to manage those to maintain voltage balance and current balance between the phases. And think about it. You got to ask, okay, who has extra energy they want to sell? What price do you want to sell it at? Then you got to go back to the normal central location and say, okay, what's the grid price for energy right now? Then you got to go out and say, I have this much energy at this price and this much at this price and so on and so forth to anybody who didn't roger up. And you got to do separate communications by phase and by circuit to the audience. You can't just broadcast a message. And those meters need to make a decision, or those home energy or building energy management systems need to make a decision and get back to that central authority and say, I want 20 kilowatts at this price. And the central goes, well, you're late getting back to me, so the best price I have is this. Do you want that? Well, I'll take 18 at that. I'm sorry, that's gone now. You can have it at this price. And people who can't afford fast computing systems like the traders use on Wall Street are going to be left holding an empty bag. They're going to take whatever the default market price is. Now, is that social justice for somebody who can't afford fast communication systems? We got issues, and the people who are hyping transactive energy don't want to talk about it. I worked for years on transactive energy as part of the Gridwise Alliance or Gridwise Architecture Council, pardon me. And I could never get it across to the proponents of transactive energy how complicated this stuff really is to operate. And I'm not sure that they still understand some of that complexity. I had the person who's in charge of that group say, we don't need to worry about by phase. Of course, that person's never tried to operate a grid either.
Doug, what about DC? What's the future of DC?
I didn't hear what you said. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What about the future of direct current?
I think that DC is something we really need. And it's tied up with solid state transformers and other equipment for the grid, because in that transformation, in the solid state transformer, you have a DC middle stage, which means I can directly output DC energy and I can directly input DC energy into that grid, into that center stage, which makes it very, very cheap to do in the deployment. We've been working hard within IEEE to come up with a standard for a DC switch that in some fashion prevents the arc flash that happens. The Emerge organization has come up with a number of DC standards for voltages and things of that sort. And if you get up here to Detroit after the COVID restrictions are off, I'll take you over to Next Energy and let you walk around in a house that doesn't have any AC in it. It's all DC. From the heating and HVAC to the refrigerator, to the washer and dryer, to the lighting, to everything in it. And in most cases, what we had to do to make the conversion from an AC appliance to a DC appliance was take stuff out of the box.
So
What about microgrids?
The political version of microgrids or the real version of microgrids?
Both?
I have no interest in the political version, which is I'm going to throw some solar on a roof and call it a microgrid. That's not a microgrid. A real microgrid has its own grounding, has the ability to disconnect and can reconnect with the grid seamlessly, has the ability to synchronize with the grid, has the ability to reduce the inertia between the main grid and the microgrid to the point where they can decouple and couple without any arc flash issues, has a built-in demand response system that is very intelligent to reduce the load within the building or buildings that are part of that microgrid in order to not deplete its resources. Apple's headquarters building is probably the best example in the world of a true microgrid. And on the $1.1 billion cost of that world headquarters, about 230 million of it are focused on making that very graceful decline in usage for the decline in resources for that building, but it can seamlessly disconnect and reconnect to PG&E's grid and be its own world. And it's got 5 stages of demand response inside the building before we get down to just critical housekeeping.
So Doug, Terry Oliver, who you know.
I know him well. He's a great guy.
Yes, he's in the audience listening to you.
Hi, Terry.
Asked about FERC 2222 about non-net metering resources, and also about transactive circuit issues as a potential of as an opportunity for automated phase management. Starting to get real kind of grid geeky here. Any comments?
Well, as we get to solid state transformers, managing the phase balance between phases is a lot easier. But we've got to get there. The Department of Energy is spending $3 billion over 10 years, and we're in year 3 right now, to build a better supply chain for solid state, to build better designs for solid state, and do proof of concept for solid state. While there are companies like Gridco Solutions that produce small solid state transformers, we don't have the big ones yet to run in substations, and we haven't sorted out all the problems with the ones we have.
So maybe we need to get back to the sort of main question of this hour. You've highlighted a lot of issues that have to be resolved one way or another, and you're not very optimistic at their
I'm the grid
resolution.
realist. You've known that forever.
I know. That's why I invited you. I think this is absolutely great. But is there, if we're going to have a sustainable world by the end of the century, or by 2050, or whatever time frame you want to think about, and the only thing that we have to rely on as far as energy, as you said, is electricity, and you're putting such a sort of a dim view of it, how's this all going to work out? Because if we don't sort this out, there is no sustainable future certainly from the energy perspective.
It may not sort out in the way that the advocates are arguing for it today, Anto.
Mm-hmm.
We may need to put in mild steel pipelines to run hydrogen around the United States, because that's a fuel that can be stored. I'm not saying it's the right answer or the wrong answer. I'm just saying that's maybe something we need. We may need to push for 50 or 60 small modular reactors.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Nuclear.
That's
Nuclear.
the way to go.
I'm not arguing that is or is not an answer, but it's base load that, even though John Wellinghoff told us that it was purely fiction, there was such a thing as base load, and that we never needed to build another large power plant in the United States, that we could do everything with demand response. Well, we saw what happened in Texas when we tried to do everything with demand response a couple of weeks ago. There's a certain amount of power that we honestly need to have available to sustain people's livelihood. Not to let them do what they want to do, but to at least make sure they're hot enough or cold enough to be relatively comfortable and safe. And we may just have to bite the bullet and do some things that are not on the agenda of the renewable people who argue everything can be done purely with wind and solar and batteries. We may have to build some very large pump storage. One of my IEEE papers, which was peer reviewed by almost a dozen people before IEEE was willing to release it, said that for seasonal storage in the United States, we needed Lake Michigan not once, but twice behind a 200-foot high dam in order to provide the seasonal storage that we would need if we tried to go all wind and solar. The Wild Rivers people right now are trying to knock down every dam in North America. There's a little bit of a dichotomy there between more storage and less storage. And pump storage is about 12 to 16% of the cost of batteries per kilowatt hour.
Doug, do you see any appetite or any whatsoever within the current administration to engage in the nuclear discussion?
So far, they haven't. We've got our first SMR going in out in Idaho. We have an approved plant, but I don't see any, yay, that's good, or ooh, that's bad out of the current administration. They are to a large extent staying out of that discussion. It's kind of like President Obama. When he came into office, he went out, during his campaign time, he went out and said, I really believe in nuclear. As soon as we solve all the problems, I'll support as much nuclear as we can build. And of course, what's the next thing he did? He shut down Yucca Mountain, which meant we never would solve all the problems.
So, Doug, this is Roger Woodward. You've spoken about a lot of technology options, nuclear and solid state and a lot of other options. And is there anyone, from your point of view, is there anyone else around the world who's perhaps got it anywhere near right? And what would you actually do if you had a, free choice to actually, go out and plan this for the future?
You got to be very careful about trying to conflate one environment to another environment in the United States or around the world. What I might do in Washington State in the United States and Western Australia, if I had the ability to do my druthers, would be very, very different. Washington State has a large amount of hydropower, and making good use of that hydropower gets you a long way down the path.
Like France. Like France. France is the same, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is that they have a number of geological features that have nothing to do with rivers, which could be turned into fairly massive pump storage facilities relatively quickly and at a price much less than using batteries. So even if they didn't want to use hydropower on the rivers, they could still do non-conventional pump storage. You start there. The next problem you got to deal with in Washington State is there aren't a lot of areas with great wind. And at least on the West Coast around Seattle, they have one of the lowest capacity factors for solar going. So they've got to pick something that makes sense to produce power. Maybe it's to buy it from British Columbia. Maybe it's to, buy it from Idaho or North Dakota or someplace like that and bring it into the state. And when it's available, store it until it's needed. Or maybe it's a couple of small modular nuclear reactors in Washington State. Now I go to Western Australia. I don't have that water capability. but I got some of the best wind anywhere in Western Australia with capacity factors that are in the 50 to 52% range if I design my turbines right, and I've got a reasonable amount of solar. So now I need to solve my storage problem. And the answer there could be pump storage, but very unconventional pump storage, because I'm talking about using seawater like they do in Okinawa. And since they're on the edge of an ocean, seawater is not all that hard to find. And building a tall, large reservoir to deal with that. It might be a couple of kilometers on a side. It might be half a kilometer tall. And I might have to build up 100 or 200 meters of base in there so that most of the water is high enough off of the ocean to actually make power. So those are all things to consider. And as you go to France, to Germany, to Denmark, to China, the answer is going to change.
Okay, so does that mean you're proposing that throughout the US you kind of regionalize the proposition?
Well, I have regionalized the proposition. One of my papers that's out on the web and at Energy Central is imagining an all renewable future for my home state of Michigan. And what I do in Michigan is probably not what I do in Ohio, even though the two states share a border.
Mm-hmm.
You got to take advantage of the resources that are there and figure out how to actually use them to the best case available.
So
like-
it sounds
it's like-
like
Go ahead.
we have
Anto.
to do some really big things. It's kind of the way I'm hearing what you're saying. There's a lot of potential sort of construction, sort of pump storage, those kind of things, and a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built for all of that over the next decades.
We either
Chad
build
just
we either build infrastructure, Anto, or we get a part-time power system.
right. So Chad just sort of asked a question on the Q&A about sort of the education part of it, because a lot of what you're telling us here, I've heard over the years in the conferences that I used to organize, but it's new to a lot of people. Just the sort of complexity, we in this group talk about the complexity of smart buildings and analytics and everything else, but I think compared to that, what you're describing as the complexity of the grid is just many times more complex. Is there a sort of a role for educating, not the complexity, but educating your normal consumer about the value of energy? Or when Chad was also sort of talking about the fact that there's some research and some studies that if you actually switch off your camera on a Zoom meeting, you're reducing the carbon footprint by like 98%. Is that a way through this education?
The problem is that people who are pushing particular technologies and particular outcomes have come up with some very simple sounding language to make everything sound so incredibly simple. I had a salesman for solar panels in my house about 3 months ago, and I listened all the way through his pitch. It sounded wonderful. It sounded like I was going to have a printing press on my roof that was going to print dollar bills for me, that my power would never go out, and a bunch of other things. And I took the one line for his system after he was done, and I said, there's no transfer trip switch here. So if the grid goes out, my solar power goes out. Oh, no. You don't need that transfer trip switch. You don't need to be isolated. Our solar will keep running no matter what happens. I said, this battery over here, based on my consumption, It's going to give me about 90 minutes of power. And if I'm putting it out on the grid, probably 15 minutes worth of power. No, that battery will last you 3 or 4 days, no problem. And I just went through the technical issues with what he wanted to sell me. And by the time I was done, he looked at me and said, "You really know something about this electricity thing, don't you?" You know, there was an old joke when I was in college that the difference between a computer salesman and a used car salesman is the used car salesman knew when he was lying. I think we can replace the computer salesman with the solar salesman at this point.
So comments
have-
from the group to start to wrap up.
I think Doug's contribution has been terrific. I haven't heard the energy side in quite some time from the supply perspective. And I really appreciate, Doug, your coming on and sharing your experience and insights into where things stand today.
We need to be very careful about fixing this machine for this century.
Yeah.
Because if we don't, we will permanently wreck the most complex machine on Earth. It's taken us 120 years to build it, carefully studying every move we've made. You know, we used to run it on 3,500 power sources. Today we've got over 1 million, and we mostly haven't changed the way we control the machine.
Wow. Doug, I know you hadn't mentioned it, but I hate to see natural gas continue to be sidelined, given how the enormous supply that we have in this country, the reliability of it, the fact from a perspective, from a cooking perspective, I much prefer natural gas over electric any day of the week. And I think I speak for a lot of chefs who would rue the day they have to give up natural gas to cook on. Just curious what your thoughts.
Faye. The chefs have moved to inductive. Get off the gas.
Yeah,
Inductive is the way to go, man.
Okay, fine. But anyway, Doug, appreciate your thoughts on this subject.
Whether we like it or not, we're going to have to use natural gas for at least the next 20 years. We can't get to something that's going to be a sustainable grid in that time frame. And that's only if we mobilize similar to the way we mobilized for World War II. Cars need to go up on blocks, steel mills need to run 24/7. We need 800 tons of steel for every tower we put a wind turbine on the top of. We need 3 tons of copper for every wind turbine we put up.
Wow.
Right now, we have about 15,000 wind turbines in the United States of 1 megawatt or larger. In order to make this work as a 50-50 wind and solar with an all electric economy, we need 1 million 2.5 megawatt wind turbines. To do that in 10 years means that we need to go from producing about 4,000 wind turbines in the United States a year to producing about 100,000 turbines in the United States a year. We need 320 acres every hour of new solar panels. And we need 640 acres to install those 320 acres of solar panels on every hour. That's not business hours. That's not 40 hours a week. That's 8,760 hours. So
Doug, where should we be? Where should we go? You're saying what's going to be
I'm not
difficult.
arguing we shouldn't go there. I'm just arguing it's a lot bigger task than most people are willing to admit.
If you were the energy czar, where would you go?
The first place I go is close offshore, up and down the east and west coasts of the United States and into all the Great Lakes, with the exception of Lake Superior, because it's too deep to put anchored turbines in. They'd all have to be floating, and that's expensive. And I look at every bit of the offshore waters, east and west, south, that are less than 200 feet deep, and put 10 to 15 megawatt turbines in every 2 miles. That'd be the first thing I do, because that will give me the highest capacity factor. The second thing that I would probably do is take all the federal land in Arizona, New Mexico, Western Texas, working my way up into Nevada, and blanket all of that land that isn't forest with solar, because I'm going to get the highest capacity factor if I do that. And by putting most of my turbines offshore east and west, I have very short runs to a lot of my load centers in Los Angeles and San Francisco and New York and Washington, D.C. So I don't have to run all this massive transmission through the heart of the country. I just need to run massive transmission from down in the Southwest to the West Coast and to the East Coast. Then I'd start looking at the 5,000 features that were identified in the United States as potential non-traditional pump storage locations, much like San Diego County Water Authority has done with their water reservoirs for drinking water, turning it into a 500 megawatt by multi-gigawatt pump storage facility. Those would be the places I would start. There's a lot more than that to do, but those are relatively easy. The other thing I do is completely wreck our current building code and start over again for insulation and energy efficiency. I'd make lead look like lead.
Cool.
My new building
So-
has R70 in the walls and R100 in the ceiling, and I heat it with one passive thermal solar system. And I live in Michigan. I spent $200 to make that heating unit.
So we are well past the top of the hour. I think we can go on for quite a long time here with lots of interest on this subject, but we do have to bring it to a wrap. I think, to be fair, people have schedules. So Doug, I think we all highly appreciate your perspective and lots of different really great comments on the chat about what we talked about. And can you give us just sort of on closing one sort of hopeful note, maybe?
If we want to get there collectively, we will. We have the engineering knowledge to make it work, no matter what scenario gets picked. We just need to realize how much work is in any scenario in order to get to where we want to go.
It's a great place to wrap this up. Thank you very much, Doug. We'll get video of this on YouTube by the morning, and thank you everybody for being here and the attendees, and we shall see you next week on Monday Live, next Monday. Thanks, Doug, and thanks everybody.
Thanks, Doug.
Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Doug. Bye now.